Hello everyone and welcome to the new event for the new academic year of 2020-2021. So thank you for joining us today at the event. At this event, the Decentralized Nicosia Chapter decided to host a meetup in a different way that it was used to. Having in mind the current circumstances and for public safety, we are hosting this event live, open to anyone that wishes to join us with a distinguished guest, Dr. Scott Stornetta, who will be talking about the essence of the blockchain and the giving of three examples of future work inspired by the Blockchain Thesis. Later on, there will be a hands-on virtual asset services providers discussion with myself, Antonia Michail, Bruno Leao, Mr. George Agathangelou, and Simon Zenios. A special thanks prior to proceeding, we would like to give to our technology partner, iSpiral, for supporting this event. iSpiral sees business being KYC and AML compliant with minimum effort. iSpiral, via its unified platform, automates onboarding processes, KYC and transaction monitoring, as well as transaction screening. Through the use of iSpiral partners, Solutions One can also perform cryptocurrency, AML investigation, evaluate, and his virtual assets risk. So without any further ado, let's proceed with the presentation of Dr. Scott Stornetta. Dr. Stornetta is considered by many to be the father of blockchain. Dating back to 1991, his pioneering series of papers written by and with co-author Dr. Stuart Haber at Belcore received the 1992 Discover Award for Computer Software and were featured in the New York Times in 1995. This helped lay the foundation for Bitcoin and other digital currencies. He was Assistant General Manager of the 125-person Mathematical and Computer Sciences Laboratory, whilst he consulted for many years evaluating the commercial potential of emerging technologies on behalf of universities, commercial research labs, and venture capital interests. Along with Dr. Haber, he co-founded Surety, a Belfort spin-off. Surety's offering constituted the first commercial deployment of blockchain. Dr. Stornetta received his PhD in physics from Stanford University after attending MIT, Harvard, and Brigham Young University. Currently, Dr. Stornetta is a partner and the chief scientist of Yugen Partners, an early-stage private equity firm investing in companies leveraging blockchain technology. So let's all welcome Dr. Stornetta. Thank you.
Hello. All right. Well, I certainly appreciate that introduction. I think it's a little bit inflated, but if everyone would just lower their expectations a little bit, then I will try to meet them. You know, whenever someone says father of blockchain, I always feel a little bit that's not quite right. I would be happy to say that Stuart and I laid the foundations of the blockchain, but I wouldn't want to claim father of blockchain simply because blockchain has come to mean so many more things that go beyond what Stuart and I initially did. And I don't want to take away credit for all of the people that have added additional value to our, what we did. I think maybe we created a kind of proto-blockchain or sort of beginning blockchain. The second part is really a much more practical and useful part. This is the useless part of the presentation because I'm going to talk about some things just sort of a little more abstract and in theory. But I hope you'll bear with me because I do think that they have some relevance to what you'll hear later on, and hopefully also just some relevance in your own life. Because I've spent a lot of time reflecting on what the essence of the blockchain is and where that might lead us in the future. Okay, and it's really that I intend to talk about. So let me jump in just kind of with a reminder that for Stuart and myself, this whole journey began with the efforts to create an immutable record, a record that all the world could be witness to, so that we would all have that single sort of shared source of information and could do the things that then allows us to do. And while it got some attention at the time, it was only really thanks to Satoshi and his generous mention of us in his footnotes that people started reaching out to me and asking if I could offer any more perspective on the blockchain. So thank you, Satoshi, for remembering Stuart and myself, and helping people understand that, in fact, there was something commercially available so many years ago that was that sort of proto blockchain. Obviously, in many ways similar, but also in some ways different from the many uses that we have today. But having been able to think about this this issue for over 30 years, it's really caused me to reflect, as I've looked at all of the emergent phenomenon related to blockchain, on what the real essence of the blockchain is. And this is really not about the technical essence. Obviously, there are technological innovations that make things possible. But the real question is, why does it add value? Why is it a step forward? And I think if you take a step back and reflect on its real essence, it comes down to two things. One, having a single shared record among a group of people or institutions. And then two, using that record in a way that encourages peer-to-peer interactions. And what do I mean by peer-to-peer? Well, when you have everything, all the wealth concentrated, say, in just a handful of companies, and they sort of dictate how other people have to work in the world, that's not peer-to-peer. That's a kind of inequality that comes from both the concentration of capital as well as power and authority. And the blockchain not only gives us a single shared record, but it encourages us in enforcing the record and making use of the record to work more on a peer-to-peer level. And so I have been working recently on some very speculative applications of these two ideas. And if you will just humor me for a few more minutes before we get to the practical and useful side of today's meeting, then I will describe one of those. I will describe the three things I've been working on, but one of them in much greater detail. Now, before I do that, I don't know how well you can see, but I chose to wear a very specific tie today. And I'm just going to try to hold it up to the camera to see if anybody can recognize what the tie is a picture of. Okay. This is supposed to represent Don Quixote, the man of La Mancha, who, you know, was a little bit crazy, but also idealistic. And part of the proof of that was him mounting a horse and going out to take on big challenges, one of which was mistaking a windmill for a dragon and going off to charge at the windmill. And this tie that I'm wearing is a modern day juxtaposition of that, because it's Don Quixote, but he's tilting at a new high efficiency electricity generating windmill. And the three examples that I'm now going to discuss are all examples, if you will, of tilting at windmills, in that they are still in the very earliest stages of coming to fruition. And so it would be easy, and it wouldn't bother me if anyone classified me as being just a little bit too idealistic and a little bit too kooky to be going after these topics. But the three areas, the three projects that I'm now involved with, one is called Jugendpedia. You can actually go online and look at a beta version of Jugendpedia. It's jugendpedia.org. And the idea is it's a way for early stage companies to get a sort of objective assessment of how they're progressing long before they would be large enough or important enough to merit an entry in Wikipedia. So this is a kind of Wikipedia for startup companies. It's a single shared record, and it encourages peer-to-peer activities among those that might invest in the startup companies. Again, I hope you understand that that grows out of my own current day job, so to speak, working in venture capital. The second is something called Common Capital. And that is even in a more primitive stage, and I don't even have a website to share with you for that. But the basic notion is, how do we make sure that as capital accumulates in the economic system, that it can be allocated in a more peer-to-peer and frictionless way to each of us as we try to create value for others. And then the third, unlike the first two, Jugendpedia and Common Capital are both self-sustaining business ventures. The third is a charitable venture called Gazillion. And it's that I'm going to spend the balance of the time today speaking. So let me go ahead and show you what the Gazillion system is about. Since some of you may have to leave early, I thought I'd sum it all up in the first slide, okay, so nobody's left out. So the basic idea is to get rich and then save the world, okay? Are there any questions? Okay, well, I'm guessing that maybe some people don't understand all the details of this, even though to me it seems pretty self-explanatory. So let me try to anticipate some of your questions. You know, I think just about everyone would prefer to be rich. In the United States, there's a very famous quote from someone that was an entertainer, Mae West. She says, "I've been rich and I've been poor, and let me tell you, rich is better." And yet, here's the interesting twist, okay? Past a certain point, wealthier people are not happier, okay? This is an economic study. You can see the footnote if you need to understand a little more of the details, but it basically says, depending on the country that you're located in, past a certain level of annual income, having more income actually doesn't make you any happier. And so I'm going to, for the purposes of this discussion, make a distinction between being wealthy and being rich, okay? I'm not suggesting that one can be rich if there are basic economic needs that are not met. So certainly wealth plays a part. But as this study indicates, it doesn't play as much of a part as people often think it does. Now, why is that? Well, I want to tell you two stories, one of them apocryphal and the other one documented. The first story is called Enough, okay? And it's a story that my son told me. One of my sons, who's an economist, told me. He says, apparently there was a party held out in a very very ritzy and expensive suburb of New York City called the Hamptons. And the party was hosted by a billionaire hedge fund manager. But two people at the party were famous authors. One was a writer named Kurt Vonnegut, who's known for some of his science fiction. And the other author was a man named Joseph Heller, who's famous for the book Catch-22. At any rate, Vonnegut and Heller are at this party hosted by the billionaire. And Vonnegut says to Heller, doesn't it bother you that our host earns more money in one day than you will earn in your entire lifetime from royalties from Catch-22? And Heller responds to Vonnegut and says, no, it really doesn't bother me. And that's because I have something that this billionaire will never have. And Vonnegut says, well, what is that? He says, I have enough. Now, the second story, called Penicillin, is the story, a historically true story, of the head of the Rothschild family in the 1800s. At the height of the Rothschilds family's prominence and affluence and influence, the head of the family got a staph infection and died shortly thereafter. And the observation is that if he had lived in our day, okay, he could have gone to any local pharmacy or chemist and for $1 purchased a generic dosage of penicillin that would have saved his life. But back in his day, which was in the early 1800s, no amount of money was sufficient to save his life, to extend his life. And so in some sense, all of us that live today are wealthier than this richest person in the world at the time. And so I think there's a lesson to be learned from both of these stories that helps us understand how to get rich. It's also reflected in a saying from a Jewish rabbi. Okay, it looks like it's been resolved. I hope it's resolved to viewers. Anyway, this rabbi's name, Ben Soma, he posed a question in Hebrew, who is rich? And then that's on the first line, and then the answer here is on the line below, okay? And I'm assuming that some of you are a little rusty in your Hebrew, and so I'm going to translate it for you. And he says, the answer is, he who appreciates what he has. And I think there's a great deal of meaning in that statement, that we might be wealthy, but we're not truly rich until we feel that kind of appreciation and satisfaction that comes from feeling that what we have is enough, and perhaps even more than enough. And I know that this has all been very, very philosophical to this point, but I think there's a practical way to apply this in actually making a difference in both in your I'm just going to wait until the screen comes up. So I started to think about the last time I felt rich. And it's a story about a purchase I made of a piano. I grew up playing musical instruments, but as you become an adult, you often find that there's just not an adult, a father, a husband. There's just not as much time in the day anymore. And so playing the different instruments that I played, I lost that chance. And so I decided perhaps if I bought a digital piano that I could find some time to recover my satisfaction about music. And so I scoured a lot of online sources and finally found just the piano that I wanted. But it was a little expensive. And so I started looking around, seeing if it was ever on sale. And a number of months passed. And then one day I ran across a website where they had this very digital piano, but in mint condition, but it had been returned by a previous owner, and they were offering it at a substantial discount. And so I just felt so terrific for having happened upon this savings. What I thought was very interesting was it wasn't just a sense of having saved some money, but there was a genuine feeling of gratitude on my part that I could now purchase this, and I wanted to take some percentage of the money I saved and find a way to give it to someone else so they could have this same kind of feeling that I was having. But I didn't quite know how to make that work. But I continued to reflect on what other things I could do that would give me that feeling of being rich, okay, besides saving on a piano. And so over the course of several months, I engaged in a number of activities, and let me list some of them. The first was cutting the cord. A lot of people are dropping cable here in the United States, at least, because it just doesn't seem to provide much value, and many of the things that we want can be purchased independently. And so cutting the cord is a big part of people saving some money here where I live. But I just couldn't do it myself. It was too complicated to process, switching providers and making sure that I had covered all the bases. And so I needed help from someone else. And in fact, I got one of my sons to help me. In a similar fashion, I came across a situation where I needed help on accurately filling out my taxes and got someone else to help me. And finally, most recently, I had to replace my furnace. And I found a way by pooling resources online to actually get a much lower price quote for the furnace than when I initially tried. And so in addition to those generating feelings of gratitude, I found out that two other things were necessary to make this a kind of systematic process. And that is, I pulled information from a variety of sources, and there were also times where I needed support from just a peer. I needed support from another human that could assist me in working through this process. And all of that taken together led me to an idea for the network that I'm going to talk about later today. So this is the sort of feeling rich, making things, having a greater appreciation for what I have. But there's another part for the why is it never enough feeling. And that is the society that we live in, particularly the advertising-driven consumer society that we live in, actually is working hard to make sure that no matter what we have, it's never enough. And I think many of you are familiar with the school of work in economics that's about rational choice and irrational economics, irrational decisions. And they've uncovered a number of cognitive biases that we as humans seem to share. And the advertising marketplace, unfortunately, often uses these biases to work against us. And the two most common biases are called the anchoring bias and the framing bias in this regard. And I'm not going to go into any real detail about those, but you're welcome to do further research on those. But here's an example of anchoring bias that we see in this picture on the left. Okay. There's a certain price for these soft drinks if you buy a 2-liter bottle. Let's say it's $1.50, something like that. But there's also a special. If you buy 10 bottles, you can have it for $10. Now, initially your thought is, well, I could save a lot of money. But the thought that gets suppressed is, do I really need 10 2-liter bottles? But the way the example is anchored or framed, it tends to suppress you thinking about whether you really need this and more about how much you're going to save over if you just bought the one bottle that you actually did need. This works in other ways, and I'll give you another example that I personally encountered. So I needed to get a replacement treadmill. That's my one homage to trying to stay in shape even during the winter. And I had a treadmill that had lasted for 10 years and it had served its purpose well, but it was time to move on. It had worn out. And so I went online to find a new treadmill, a replacement treadmill. Well, I found one that looked good, this one that's on the left. It was reasonably priced. And I was about to purchase it until I noticed that there were some additional options. Okay. In other words, they pointed out that this treadmill had a 5-inch screen. But if I clicked on the adjacent option, it had a bigger screen, a 7-inch screen. And besides that, it also had an automatic fan that would kick in as soon as I was starting to run. And I started to think, wow, think how much better that 7-inch screen would look compared to that measly old 5-inch screen. And yeah, I do get kind of hot when I run. Wouldn't it be great if I had a fan that automatically kicked in? And so notice how I started with something that was perfectly fine to meet my needs, but it was framed against alternatives. And all I could think of was, wow, that 7-inch screen would sure be nicer than the 5-inch. And the auto fan would sure be nicer than the no fan. Of course, it was a couple $100 more. But I think this is the reason why it often feels like what we have is never enough, because we're up against some of the most sophisticated manipulation of our own cognitive biases that money can buy. And so there's a real fight going on. All right, I want to talk now about how I tried to take all of these thoughts and put them into a website that is in beta right now, and that's called gazillion.network. And it's there, but you can't get access to it. You can just go and see the homepage. But let me tell you a little bit about how gazillion.network works. The first step, as I promised, was you get rich. Namely, you think of something that you need assistance with. Any of the items that I just described in my previous list. And so you go to Gazillion and the Gazillion network, and either because of the information that's presented there or because of the voluntary assistance from someone else that is part of the Gazillion network, you solve your problem or you deal with whatever the issue was, and you have this feeling of being grateful. It cost you nothing, and yet you got this benefit. Well, that leads us to step 2. We invite people on a purely voluntary basis to donate a small portion of whatever they think they've saved or gained by working for free with the Gazillion network. And I'll talk more about how that works. But to fast forward to the third step, you then become a member of the gazillion network, what we would call a gazillionaire. And look, if a millionaire is rich, think how rich a gazillionaire is. And you have the opportunity to assist others in making that same piece of progress. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what happens when you donate a portion of your savings or your increase to the gazillion network. First of all, 100% of your donation goes directly to someone that benefits in a way that is in keeping with the blockchain, an immutable record that's fully transparent. There are no overhead charges. No one is making a buck off of gazillion. But now I want to show you how the concept of how what you donate goes to some very concrete other person that you can treat as a peer in order to help them also become rich. And to do that, I'm going to steal a 1-minute video that comes from the religious organization that I and my family belong to. So I'm blatantly acknowledging that I'm stealing this idea, and if you'll just watch this 1-minute video, you'll get a sense of how the donation part works. And again, I don't know how well this is going to go over the network, but I'm just going to give it a shot. And so to do that, I have to actually come out of the mode I was in and get this video. So again, I'm hoping that you got the gist of what was going on in that video. If you didn't, let me try to recap very quickly. So the concept is that instead of a vending machine, you can walk up to a giving machine. And instead of choosing a candy bar or, something that you need, you can instead choose a specific item that you can donate to someone else, whether it's a meal, a textbook, a jump rope, some chickens that assist someone in improving their economic status. There are a number of examples. And this is how the gazillion network will work. Once you've donated a portion of whatever you felt you saved by using gazillion, that money goes into your gazillion account. And then you can select items from inside gazillion that you can donate to someone else. I want to come back to the idea of the cognitive biases and talk about how we can use the anchoring bias and the framing bias, we can use it to our advantage. And so if you recall, I showed you before how the never enough advertising led me to constantly be trying to decide whether to buy the 5-inch screen without the fan or the 7-inch screen with the automatic fan. And I was stuck trying to compare between those two items. It's hard to not think I'd really like to have the one with the fan and the bigger screen. But that's just because the question has been framed in the wrong way. With the Gazillion Network, you can look at the purchases you're about to make and compare in a different way. Gee, I could buy the 7-inch screen with the automatic fan, or I could buy the 5-inch screen with no fan and throw in 2 more chickens and a soccer ball and a textbook. And even after I've gotten all of those things, I can still put $100 more into my own savings. This is the framing effect that we want to take advantage of, not what advertisers are sending to us. And you might be curious, I thought I'd show you. So now you get a gazillionaire account and it records what you've purchased. Yeah, you bought the 5-inch screen with no fan, but you also got the 2 chickens and the soccer ball and the textbook and the savings. Now, what happens after you make this purchase? Well, here's the first thing I can guarantee you, okay? I never think about the screen size now that I've made the purchase. And there are people that are now self-sufficient or enjoying research or enjoying recess or learning. And I can also compute the value when I get older of the savings that I've made. That's what a gazillionaire account looks like. It lets you record both how you're becoming rich and how you've helped others become rich. Now, some of you might be interested to know this is the actual treadmill that I bought, has the measly 5-inch screen and no fan. But here's what I did. I already had a fan, so I just put it up on top of the dresser. And that treadmill, if you look on the live screen of me, I'm actually sitting here in my basement, and you can see that treadmill back there. So I really did make that purchase. I want to sum up just by, first of all, thanking you for the time to speak, to remind you that the beginning of this talk was about trying to understand what the real essence of the blockchain and its value creation was. And I have concluded that it's in creating a single shared record that we all can benefit from, and that it encourages a kind of peer-to-peer interaction that I think is sadly missing in societies where capital and power are highly centralized. In conclusion, I just want to say that there's a popular game show in my country, and I know in a number of countries in Europe, called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? But I think a better question to ask, and I'll conclude with this, is that we really should all be saying, who wants to be a gazillionaire? Because very few of us will ever be millionaires. But if we work together, we can help the whole world become gazillionaires. So if you have questions, as I said, gazillion.network is up, but it doesn't let people in except for the early beta testers. But if you have interest in that, would like to learn more, might want to be an early user, just send email to info@gazillion.network. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I hope you got something out of it. And if not, we're now turning to the practical and relevant portion of today's meeting.
Thank you so much, Stornetta. That was indeed an inspiring presentation. So the presentation of Dr. Stornetta gave me a lot of food for thought. Why us people do what we do, and when is enough something. So Dr. Stornetta actually mentioned that when it's feeling rich, it's feeling when you have enough. So this actually brings me to our next presentation, which will continue exactly with this point. Dr. Scott Stornetta actually set an example. What does solidarity means? It's an amazing and beautiful idea. The reason we've put the title on the general presentation about business and AML sides of the same coin, it's exactly this, because if you want to have healthy business and have this benefit as a whole, you need to have some rules set down, which shouldn't actually be rules. It should be common sense. It should be something that will allow people to actually spot what does other people do for exploiting other people. Because at the end of the day, for some people gaining something, some others have to lose. If some others have to lose, then who is losing, who is winning? Because it's nothing bad to become rich, but what is about when you're becoming rich in the expense of people that can't afford it? We had some similar cases these days, and I will refer to the recent revelations of Al Jazeera papers. The people that were brought in front, they were not the problem, they were part of the problem. If a society, if a system as such is corrupt, then there is no room for prosperity. There is no room for nothing else. There is no room for healthy business. So, for me at least, despite being the president of Decentralized, I'm also an ML compliance professional. So, for me, regulation is something that is live. It derives from the needs of society. So, if law is something live and it's coming from the needs of society, for regulation to be there, it means that there were abusers in the system. So, coming up to our next presentation about the virtual assets and virtual asset services providers, so we wanted to give an aspect of how to be able to have a hands-on approach, because we know that many compliance professionals are struggling, and having the practical experience of it, and by reading the FATF's guidance and the international guidance, I think we all need to support each other in order to go through this together. So, in order for people, like most of the compliance people, it's a new sector, the VASP, the virtual asset services providers and the virtual assets. We need to understand this together in order not to be able to not to get lost in it. So the purpose of this presentation actually, it's exactly this, to create a basic understanding with regards to virtual assets and virtual asset services providers, and to bring attention to basic compliance and anti-money laundering requirements that for the professionals that are actually servicing this sector. In order to do so, thank you. In order to do so, we will examine, among others, in order to get there, what is blockchain for those that are not aware of it. It will only take 7 minutes, and we will have one of the best in Cyprus to explain that, Mr. George Agathangelou. And then we'll proceed with the taxonomy, which means the classification. It has nothing to do with tax, guys. Of the virtual assets, we're going to classify them, and we have with us Mr. Simon Zenios, who is a lawyer that happens to be specialized in this, and he will help us with discovering and explaining the whole taxonomy system of virtual assets. Then myself will proceed with the trends in money laundering with regards to virtual asset services providers and virtual assets, and the key actors in the international framework. And then we're very honored to have with us Mr. Bruno Leao, who has a vast experience in the AML sector, who will help us go through what does a hands-on policy for a compliance officer should include, plus he will guide us through the red flags provided by FATF and some real-life cases provided by the FATF. At the end, we have, of course, a special bonus for the FATF, what you need to focus on, plus the courses provided by the University of Nicosia exactly for this issue, the free MOOC provided, plus the Regulatory Academy, which is a very, very nice initiative, and it's actually taught by one of the best in the field. So I think we're ready to begin with exploring this issue. We will first start with Mr. George Agathangelou regarding the blockchain basics and what is actually blockchain virtual assets, how do you store them, and it's very important, so please pay attention because cold wallet, hot wallet, they're all important. So I'll give the floor to Mr. George Agathangelou. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I will start with a small introduction to blockchain for all the newbies that haven't heard this before, and also to refresh the mind for whoever has already heard about this. So people use the term blockchain technology to mean different things, and it can be confusing at times. Sometimes they're talking about the Bitcoin blockchain, sometimes it's Ethereum blockchain, so many other blockchains out there, Litecoin, Polkadot for some, excuse me, Link, and so on. So sometimes it's other virtual currencies, sometimes it's digital tokens, sometimes we're referring to smart contracts. Most of the time, though, we are referring to distributed ledgers, i.e., it's a list of transactions that is replicated across a number of computers. So rather than having it stored centrally in a server, we have replicated databases that are synchronized over the internet and keep information in real time. So distributed ledger technology, or in short DLT, enables the storage, the update, and validation of information in a decentralized way. A well-known example of distributed ledger technology is blockchain, which is the technology underlying Bitcoin. However, DLT does not always entail the use of crypto assets. So, what exactly is blockchain? A blockchain is, in the simplest terminology, a timestamp series of immutable records of data that is managed by a number of nodes or a cluster of computers and is not owned by a single entity. Each of these blocks of data is secured and bound to each other using cryptographic principles. Therefore, they create a chain of blocks, blockchain. So, how does it work? You can picture a spreadsheet that is duplicated among thousands and thousands of computers around the world across a network of computers. Then imagine that this network is designed to regularly update this spreadsheet, and then you have the most basic understanding of blockchain. Information held on a blockchain exists as a shared and continuously updated database. This is a way of using the network that has obvious benefits. The blockchain database is not stored in a single location, meaning the records are truly public and easily verifiable. No centralized version of this information exists for a hacker to corrupt. Hosted by millions of computers simultaneously, this data is accessible to anyone that has an internet connection. Just a small note here, what we have described is the public blockchains. we have also permission blockchains that as an additional requirement, you will be needed to be granted a permission in order to view information there. Now, if you imagine distributed ledger technology or blockchain as a field, then crypto assets are one of the many trees that could grow inside this field. So, what is cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrency is an internet-based medium of exchange that uses cryptographical functions to conduct financial transactions. Cryptocurrencies leverage blockchain technology to gain decentralization, transparency, and effectively also immutability. We cannot change information that's contained on a blockchain, and we cannot delete it. It is a full audit system, meaning that information that is pertained there stays there forever as long as the blockchain exists. The most important feature of a cryptocurrency is that it is not controlled by any central authority. The decentralized nature of the blockchain makes cryptocurrencies theoretically immune to the old ways of government control and interference. Cryptocurrencies can be sent directly between two parties via the use of public key cryptography, or private and public keys. These transfers can be done with minimal processing fees, allowing users to avoid the steep fees charged by traditional financial institutions. So this technology empowers people to send money all over the world without asking for permission and for a minimal fraction of the cost that it would take with the traditional legacy systems. So when we come to blockchain basics, what are blockchain, virtual currencies, and crypto assets? We will see some key terms. The European Banking Authority states that crypto assets means an asset that, first of all, depends primarily on cryptography and distributed ledger technology or similar technology as part of its perceived or inherent value. Secondly, it is neither issued or guaranteed by any central bank or public authority. Thirdly, it can be used as a means of exchange and or for investment purposes and or to access a good or service. So it is a fun fact that the term crypto asset has been selected by the European Banking Authority in line with the approach favored by international standard setting bodies such as the BSBS and the FSB. On the other hand, FATF selects the term virtual assets and defines it as a virtual asset is a digital representation of value that can be digitally traded or transferred and can be used for payment or investment purposes. Virtual assets do not include digital representation of fiat currencies, securities, and other financial assets that are already covered elsewhere in the FATF recommendations. So here we're going to see a slide with the blockchain basics. What is blockchain, virtual currencies, and crypto assets? So how are actually coins created and how are these transactions confirmed? If we take a look at the mechanism ruling the databases of cryptocurrencies, we can take the example of Bitcoin. So a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin consists of a network of peers. Every peer has a record of the complete history of all the transactions that ever taken place, and thus with software we can calculate the balance of each and every one account. A transaction is a file that says Bob gives X amount of Bitcoins to Alice and is signed by Bob's private key. Its basic public key cryptography is nothing special at all. After being signed, a transaction is broadcasted in the network, sent from one peer to every other peer. This is the basic peer-to-peer technology structure. The transaction that has been validated by the miners is almost immediately known by the whole network, but only after a specific amount of time it gets confirmed. In the case of Bitcoin, every block is confirmed on average every 10 minutes. So confirmation is a critical concept in cryptocurrencies. You could say that cryptocurrencies are all about confirming this information, the transfer of the balances. As long as a transaction is unconfirmed, it is pending and it can be forged. When a transaction is confirmed, it is then set in stone. Nobody can change it. It's no longer forgeable. It cannot be reversed. It is part of an immutable record of historical transactions that is broadcasted and stored from all the nodes that are participating in this network. Everybody has a copy of that transaction. So, as we said, it's a part of an immutable record of transaction, or the so-called blockchain. An important distinction is that only miners can confirm this transaction. It is their job in a cryptocurrency network. They take transactions, they mark them as legit, they confirm the legitimacy, and then they communicate this transaction to the rest of the network. So, after a transaction is confirmed by a miner, every node adds that transaction to its database of transactions, to the historical record. And essentially, it becomes a part of the blockchain. For this job, miners are receiving various monetary incentives in order to provide the hardware and the electricity to do all this hard work for us. So the miners are getting rewarded with a token of the cryptocurrency, and in this example with the Bitcoin, they're receiving the so-called block reward. Every 10 minutes, a miner is rewarded with this kind of mining reward. Another very important introductory, let's say, amount of information is how do we save these crypto assets? Digital crypto asset wallets are used to store public and private keys and to interact with distributed ledger technology with a view to allowing users to send and receive crypto assets and monitor their balances. Crypto asset wallets come in different forms. Some support multiple assets, while others are specific to a few tokens alone. There can be software wallets, there can be hardware wallets, and we differentiate this as cold or hot wallets. Again, when we're referring to cold wallets, we are primarily referring to wallets that are kept offline, while a hot wallet could be a wallet that is kept online, and it has some security limitations. DLT networks typically provide their own wallet functions. For example, Bitcoin Core for Bitcoin or Mist Browser for Ethereum as just some of the examples. There are also specialized wallet providers. Some wallet providers, the so-called custodial wallet providers, not only provide wallets to their clients, but they can also safeguard their crypto assets, just like a bank. So, what is important to keep here? There are two main options for storing. You can store with a third-party service provider like a hosted wallet, online wallets or exchanges, also called the hot wallet, or you can store on your own local wallet, an unhosted wallet. It can be in a paper form, it can be in a hardware form like a USB similar device, and these are called cold wallets. At this point, I will only mention a very important quote from the cryptosphere. If it's not your keys, it's not your coins. And we have seen many times custodial wallets being hacked, centralized exchanges being hacked, and what is actually being done is we have a mismanagement of the keys from the employees of the company, and as a result, many Bitcoins have been stolen from these exchanges. However, we need to differentiate and explain to people that if you are in control of your keys, you are in control of your coins. When you give the responsibility of safeguarding your coins to someone else, then you should have no complaint when someone hacks the exchange and takes your coins. At this point, I will give the stage to Mr. Simon Zenios, which he can continue with the taxonomy of crypto assets.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
George.
very much.
Thank you. So just before Simon comes, I would like us to keep one very basic point here. Very, very basic. Remember the classification between hot wallet, cold wallet, because it will be important for later. So let's welcome Mr. Simon Zenios.
Thank you. The use of crypto assets has evolved rapidly in the last couple of years. A few years ago, we had only few crypto assets in the market. Now, every day, new crypto assets are created. How do we classify crypto assets? Are a type of private asset that depends primarily on cryptography and DLT as part of their perceived or inherent value. What applies in the legal world? For new crypto assets created in our days, the white paper plays a very important role. What's a white paper? Basically, it's a legally binding business plan. So imagine having a business plan saying that your company is going to do A, B, C, D. This is what really the white paper is. Now, what is the role of the white paper and the token? Well, the white paper is going to classify what type of token you are giving to the owners of the token. Is it going to be a security token? Is it going to be a utility token? Is it going to be hybrid, stable coin? That plays a very important role. Let's take things from the beginning. The first type of crypto asset that exists is for the payment and the exchange type of tokens. For example, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, whereas you can use it to pay for a service or a good. Also, that type of token, you can exchange it and you can get fiat in exchange for it. Or you can buy another token with that. The second type of tokens we have, they are the investment type of tokens. Lately, they've been using the word security. Security token, just by holding it, there is an expectation of profit, meaning that you buy it and they promise you that they're going to do this and this. So just by holding the token, they promise you that the price will significantly raise by the next year, the next 18 months, and so on. This type of projects, these type of tokens, they are fully regulated by the authorities. For example, if you launch a project in Cyprus, then you require to be licensed by the Cyprus Security Exchange Commission. The third type of tokens we have in the market, they are called utility tokens. They get the name from the word utilization. Now, you have a token that is utility. Without the platform, it has no means at all. So just by holding the token, there is no expectation of profit at all. There is no usability at all. You need a platform to use that token. So the one cannot survive without the other. These type of projects, more frequently in the most jurisdictions in the world, they are not regulated yet. The next type of token we have, we call it hybrid because it has characteristics that they are correlated with a security token, meaning that it gives an expectation of profit just by holding it, and also they have a characteristic of the utility because there's a utilization of the token in the platform. Now, the question arises, how do we classify a type of token? What regulations are governing and what laws there are around this type of tokens? The next slide will give us the answer. The basic taxonomy of crypto assets. At the present, from an international perspective, there is no common taxonomy of the crypto assets. However, the European Union, by 2020, it promised that it will bring European Union regulations that will govern all the members of not just the European Union, but also the European Economic Zone, such as Switzerland. Nevertheless, there are some jurisdictions in the world that they have introduced some legislations for this type of tokens, such as Estonia, Malta, Switzerland, the United States of America, and lately Germany and Austria, just on January 2020, which introduced very, very strict laws that does not give you the window to be classified as a utility, even more strict laws than the USA. So generally speaking, we have just a basic taxonomy of the crypto assets. The first, as we mentioned before also, the payment or exchange or currency tokens that can be used to pay for a certain service or buy some goods. An example is Bitcoin and Litecoin. Also, we have the stable coins. Now, what are the stable coins? Stable coin is, for example, USDT. Basically, is a coin that represents the US dollar. So for each of that coin is backed by a US dollar. Whereas no bank is holding your tokens, and everything is in your either in your own ledger wallet, and you hold the keys for it. And at any given time, you have the ability to use your tokens to either pay for a certain service or exchange them back to fiat currency. The investment and security token is the second type of token that basically new startups, new companies, they use it to take an investment. So they give them a token and they promise them that by buying that token, there is an expectation of profit because we are going to do something very great with that project. We also have the utility tokens that they are used for utilization purposes, and also the hybrid tokens that they have the characteristics of both the security and the utility. Thank you, and now we'll continue with.
Thank you so much.
Antonia.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we're going to the trends in the use of virtual assets for money laundering and terrorist financing. We're gonna have a quick look on the framework, so please bear with me. I know that it's tough, I know that it's harsh, but I would highly appreciate if you could bear with me these moments. So, what are the trends in the use of virtual assets for money laundering? What are the regulatory issues and what are the key actors? I would like us to make a start for eventually, as I was about to start reading on the notes, but I took a very good advice today. And the advice was to focus on what is important. So this is what we're going to do. It's late and we are tired, you're tired, so I will not take a lot of your time, but I will tell you the basic stuff. So the majority of virtual assets related offenses are focused on predicate or money laundering offenses. So where are they usually used? It's important to know that. They're usually used in evading financial sanctions, to raise funds to support terrorism, to sell off-controlled substances and other illegal items, in fraud, tax evasion, computer crimes, child exploitation, human trafficking, and sanctions evasion. So these are the basic uses when people are actually committing a fraud relating to the financial crimes. So let's see an example. Here we have the example of WannaCry. WannaCry was back in 2017, actually brought the whole system to its knees and actually took away a lot of funds from people that were most in need. The hackers actually started with the computers were infected with the virus. The hackers actually requested for ransoms to be paid in order for the computers to decrypt and resume their activity. The initial ransom payment went to a publicly identified Bitcoin wallet. And then you have multiple transactions converting the payments from one virtual asset to another virtual asset, which is a quite commonly used technique by the criminals. And when I'm saying criminals, it doesn't mean that they're the typical guys that you are seeing like in jails and to CSI or something. When I'm saying crypto criminals, it could be like a 17-year-old child or 20-year child, and it's just hacking for fun. I mean, simple as that. It doesn't mean that there is another ultimate, or they could be involved in another criminal organization. There's no specific profiling of people doing that. So also one of the most common use cases is the usage of cryptos in buying drugs from the dark web. Most of you have heard of dark web. There's usually the usage of a Tor, and they're usually gonna use it in order to order online either drugs or weapons or any other illicit goods. So let's move on forward to the next slide. So when FATF saw that, they came up with this and they've made a statement. So while crypto assets said they do not pose a threat to the global financial stability at this point, we remain vigilant to risks, including those related to consumer and investor protection, anti-money laundering, and counter-terrorist financing of terrorism. So what did they do in June 2019? They came up with a new guidance and interpretation from whereas they have set up the international standard with regards to the AML of virtual asset services providers. So one of the most important recommendations, most of you that you're in the compliance sector, you will be aware of the 40 recommendations by FATF. The most important recommendation involving virtual assets is recommendation 15. So I will not be reading all this to you. I'll just tell you the following. You have it here. You can always go and run through FATF's recommendations. It says that countries should ensure that virtual asset services providers are regulated for anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorism purposes and licensed or registered and subject to effective systems for monitoring and ensuring compliance with the 11 measures called for in the FATF recommendations. So one of the most important things when you are servicing a virtual asset services provider, or if you are servicing a client virtual assets, please make sure they are licensed, registered, or at least they're regulated under an anti-money laundering supervisor. So moreover, the interpretive note to FATF recommendation 15 states that countries should consider virtual assets as property, proceeds, funds or other assets or other corresponding value. You'll see here that it's a very specific approach. And the reason I'm saying that is that it's important for the classification as mentioned before. So, having this in mind, we need to take into account that Europe has always an important impact from international bodies like G20, Financial Stability Board, Basel Committee, FATF. So taking these things into account, Europe came up with the fifth AML directive with regards to including virtual asset services providers into the scope. So at EU level in general, there's not a lot of clarity with regards to the applicability of current EU financial services law to crypto assets activities. It's to ensure that there is a common understanding to the extent to which current legislation addresses the risk and supports the opportunities relating to the crypto assets. But the Commission in the 2019 supranational risk assessment has classified the risk as significant. Also, the EBA mentioned that there is a general divergence in the states, which is also one of the deficiencies that the compliance officer should take into account. Because if there is not a unified approach by regulatory authorities in member states, this means that there are loopholes in the system. If there are loopholes in the system, then it's natural for a virtual asset services provider that doesn't want to be strictly regulated to go to countries, even EU countries, whereas the regime is more relaxed in this area. So Article 1 of the directive brings into the scope the anti-money laundering of the AML, the providers engaged in exchange services between virtual currencies and fiat funds, and providers of virtual currency, as well as custodian wallet providers. On the other hand, the FATF has since then adopted a definition of virtual asset services provider and has a broader scope than the fifth AML directive. And the broader scope, what does it mean? They have included more things under the scope. It's there. I mean, it's there. So what does it mean actually? That the union law is not yet in line with the FATF standards. So when we're examining a VASP, what it should normally be done, we should go directly to the FATF guidelines and red flags and everything and classifications in order to have the notion of the spirit of the fifth AML with regards to virtual assets. But again, in the EU level, this is expected to change very soon. So what I will keep from this slide is that the European Banking Authority is in its 2019 report with advice for the European Commission on crypto assets, recommended that the European Commission have regard to the FATF recommendations and any other further standards or guidance issued by the FATF as part of a holistic review of the needs, if any, for action at an EU level to address issues relating to cryptocurrencies. So the other point I would like to keep here, it's this. The countries will require a licensing or registration scheme to be in place for the categories of VASP identified in the previous slide. So what do I keep from here? What I personally keep is that if there is such a divergence in the legislation, the ML legislation of the European countries, this means that we do not have the same opportunities for competing with other countries, plus other countries who have a more relaxed framework. So we could clearly see the need for a unified AML framework towards all EU countries. Since we don't have that, we need to exercise critical thinking. And we as compliance officers, as AML professionals, we need to think, okay, let's say that I permit this client from this country with a more relaxed loophole. What happens next? There's a good indication on the FATF assessments and mutual evaluation reports where you can run either in their charts, where you can see what's the approach on the immediate outcomes of their legislation as well on their recommendations, which is a more hands-on approach. Then what does FATF expect virtual asset services providers to do? And in consequence, what should we expect to see when we are servicing a virtual asset services provider or virtual assets merchant or client? We're expected to implement the same preventive measures as financial institutions, including customer due diligence. Customer due diligence is not just ticking. You need to see the whole picture. You need to have a multi-dimensional risk-based approach and see the whole picture. For example, a utility bill. A utility bill is not sufficient if it doesn't indicate consumption. If a utility bill does not show electricity, water, something that will actually, you can actually see that it's there, it doesn't work. It's not a ticking. Oh. It's all right. Moreover, we expect to see record keeping and reporting of suspicious transactions. The company, as Bruno will later on have a more detailed presentation about it. Right. Needs to have in place a system that will actually prove that they do have transaction monitoring and they do have a way to monitor every transaction that is passing. So moreover, what we expect to see is that they are subject to strong organizational requirements. Their managers and main shareholders should be fit and proper for the purpose of anti-money laundering and combating the financing terrorism. Why is that? Because, well, when somebody's coming to your office and states that has a specific skill or specific skill set, this means that you're expecting them to see that they have a relevant background. If they're just coming and they are like, it doesn't make sense, like he's doing a job that has nothing to do with this sector or he doesn't have the relevant experience, this means that there's something wrong there. This means that he's in front of someone else. He's not the real beneficial owner, or he's not the real director, or he's not the real person that has actual decision power in this organization. So in order to spot these things, you always need to see the overall picture, the overall story being told by the case you're examining. Then you need to see that the employee management and staff with adequate skills, knowledge, and expertise. What does it mean? That you expect to have the training schedule of the organization you're examining and to have at least the organizational chart of the senior management, and you will need to actually dig in their LinkedIn accounts and actually have a look. Who are these people? What's their background? What are they doing there? Why? Because it will give you reassurance that they know what they are doing. It's important to have people there that they actually know their job. Then you need to take you need to ensure that they take all the reasonable measures to perform their functions, including through the preparation of a business continuity plan. Is what also George has mentioned before. Like, what happens if you get hacked? What's your insurance? What's the investor's insurance? What's happening there? Do they have the proper procedures in place? So you need to ensure that they have all the procedures in place and they actually keep them. That's the other important part. Then, do they have a sound internal control and risk assessment mechanism? Do they have like appropriate arrangements to keep controls and records of all transactions? Do they have systems in place to detect potential market abuse? So taking all of this into consideration and noting the European Banking Authority's position, as well as the forthcoming changes in the sector by Commission, and you all know what I'm referring to, but since has not yet passed, we cannot discuss it. We will see, though. We expect that the EU will bring up an updated legislation that will give more gravity to the FATF recommendations and guidelines. So I haven't mentioned the travel rule yet, of course, because it will be analyzed later on to Bruno's presentation. But I think we all got the general idea, and what we're keeping from here is the following: that FATF recommendations are quite good if you always take if you have a critical thinking and you take a risk-based approach. There is no ticking procedure here. You need to actually study the ML manual of the client. You need to actually study their procedures, study their stuff, and see who are they and make a complete picture. Always by taking into account the recommendations, always by taking into account the guidance, and always by taking into account the rest of the red flags. But the overall picture counts. So in what follows, Mr. Bruno Leao will give us more information and a more hands-on approach on this issue. Thank you.
Many thanks, Antonia, and I would like to thank for the invitation to be able to talk to you about what we should be looking out when we talk about VASPs and AML compliance program. So the intention is to give a high-level overview as to what we need to be looking out for in terms of us as financial institutions, payment institutions, electronic money institutions, and acquirers, whilst onboarding these sort of clients and merchants. So first things first, in order for us to be able to accept VASPs, our customers, they need to implement a comprehensive AML policy that need to be adhered to at all times. This policy should set a wide range of principles to be applied whilst analyzing applications during the client acceptance procedure. Okay, the virtual asset service providers and virtual assets AML policy should adopt, as Antonia mentioned, a risk-based approach and take into consideration the risks inherent to the virtual assets world. So basically, in a nutshell, entity that is about to accept a virtual asset service provider as clients, they need to ensure as a minimum that the entity is what they claim to be, indeed a VASP, that they are duly licensed or registered in a compliant FATF jurisdiction and is supervised by a national competent authority. We know that we've seen this in practice, that we received a lot of applications for VASPs. They're actually incorporated in countries where there is no regulatory supervision. But there's a reason why they are there, right? Because they can do pretty much whatever they want, because they have no supervision, and that specific jurisdiction has not enacted the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force. It is important that the jurisdiction, as I mentioned, has enacted the FAFT recommendations, as well as transposed into national law the dispositions of the 5th AML Directive, if we're talking about EU incorporated clients. It's also very important that they have established the appropriate controls which are commensurate with the kind of business. For instance, appropriate client due diligence, record keeping, suspicious activity reporting that is well documented, and above all, a transaction monitoring system. We will talk a little bit more about the importance of a sound transaction monitoring system and the importance of accepting VASPs as customers. There's also a very important issue that they should have appropriate record of the parties involved in the virtual assets transactions, and that the data is transmitted immediately and securely. And obviously, it's important that they are able to freeze the crypto wallet or exchange accounts for sanctioned individuals. Now, the AML policy for VASPs and virtual assets should focus on all the important aspects that will be able to provide us with a reasonable assurance that the risks that are inherent to this sort of activities are duly mitigated. And this should include details on onboarding, safekeeping of clients' assets and custody arrangements. Transparency of operations is another very important aspect. Price discovery mechanisms, cybersecurity, as well as the knowledge of the senior manager and particulars of the business, such as which clientele do they serve and which sort of volumes. I think Antonia mentioned about the the background of senior manager. I think these are very important analysis, because we need to be able to prove that the senior manager actually knows what they're doing and that's their area of expertise, taking into consideration that virtual asset service providers and virtual assets is a very specific area that requires a very specific set of skills. Now, let's pass during the onboarding. Due to the fact that virtual asset service providers are considered high-risk customers, we recommend that enhanced due diligence should be applied. Ideally, management approval should also obtain, not during the pre-approval stage, but after all the KYC and CDD procedures. So basically, we are satisfied that that specific client or merchant, they have everything that consists of within our list, which we'll see. Then management needs to approve. It is important to have a holistic view of how the business works from beginning to end, including their organizational structures, both internal and external, and their previous processing history. There's a higher risk in accepting startups for virtual asset service providers. We can't really corroborate their process history and how robust their controls are. As previously mentioned, we need to analyze their anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing and analyze their CDD program. The robustness of their information security, and especially, I would like to stress this, especially the automated technology solution that they utilize for transaction monitoring, is of utmost importance. It is very important also to analyze your internal risk assessment report as well as the external assessment report. We're going to talk a bit more what we mean about the external assessment report on the next slide. Now, we need to make sure that that the VASPs, they comply with all the requirements for a sound and robust AML compliance program. And we recommend that we actually request an external assessment of the effectiveness of the controls that should be provided by a reliable and independent third party. These would provide with reasonable assurance on the level of compliance of the policy and procedures framework, as well as the effectiveness of the underlying control vis-a-vis various risk profiles. Another important point is the effectiveness of the automated technology solution on transaction monitoring, as mentioned just now. This is essential in order to mitigate money laundering and terrorist financing risks. Also, this document should tackle the level of risks of the virtual currencies offered on the exchange platform. Now, whilst analyzing a possible candidate for onboarding, what should we be looking out for on the AML policy? One of the biggest aspects is that they do not offer anonymity-enhanced cryptocurrencies or privacy coins. Coins that encrypt their transactions and favor anonymity should not be offered by VASPs. Examples of these coins are Monero, Zcash, Verge, Dash, Komodo, and Zcoin. And I would like just to flip through these, which is a very important aspect. Normally, these institutions, they are online-based. And by just flipping through their website, we can actually recognize and identify as to the robustness of their functioning and some red flags as well. So I think one of the most important aspects is the completeness and correctness of the information. It's very essential in analyzing the level of compliance of the VASPs, like, for example, complete contact details, URLs that are being utilized, refund and cancellation policy, which are the available virtual currencies. do they provide a transaction receipt with an unequivocal transaction identifier? These are just a few. So VASP should also very clearly classify what are the prohibited activities. Okay, this will give us an idea as to how far they are willing to go with their activities. And as a minimum, I'm going just to mention a couple of them. It should be very clear that they prohibit related transactions related to sanctions and high-risk countries for money laundering and terrorist financing purposes, that they do not trade with decentralized or anonymous exchange currencies. They do not accept transactions that include the so-called tainted transactions, tainted funds, or mixers and tumblers. They do not allow the usage of virtual assets as collaterals to loans, and they do not transact to or from unhosted wallets. Now let's talk about the red flags. The truth is that the usage of virtual currency amongst criminals had been increasing over the years due to inherent decentralization of the field. On the 14th of September this year, the Financial Action Task Force published the report, Virtual Assets, Red Flag Indicators of Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing. This report aimed to assist reporting entities in both identifying and reporting potential money laundering and terrorist financing activity involving virtual assets. The red flag indicators covered in this report span the following categories: transactions, anonymity, senders or recipients, source of funds or wealth, geographical risk, sender or recipients, profiles, and the source of wealth that can identify and it can relate to criminal activity. Now, it is very important that you guys go to this report because it's quite detailed. But here, as I mentioned, our intention is actually to provide the rationale behind this and certain indication or certain examples of what would constitute a red flag. Now, let's start for a red flag with relation to the version or the client, which has also a very strict link to anonymity. So one of the red flags could be such as the user to peer-to-peer exchange websites. Mixing, when you see that a customer or website, they use mixing of Tumblr services, or they have unusual patterns involving anonymity in hence cryptocurrencies. Also, the absence of effective transaction monitoring tool is a huge red flag. Another important red flag may be identified by analyzing the background of management, as mentioned before, since this is a highly specialized field requiring a specific set of matching skills. Now the red flags with regards to the transactions. The FATF has pointed out red flags related to transactions, including size and frequency of transactions with no logical business explanations and irregular, unusual, or uncommon transaction patterns. For example, making multiple high-value transactions in a short period of time. Transferring virtual assets to multiple virtual asset service providers located in high-risk jurisdictions or jurisdictions that have weak or AML CFT regulation. These are pretty much the same red flags that we would observe in a traditional banking environment. So, I mean, it doesn't really change much. I think that what the FATF would like to be, to bring to attention to everybody is that, these still need to be observed. The red flags related to anonymity. As we mentioned before, when analyzing a client or a merchant, red flags related to anonymity are very important and are based mainly in virtual assets providing anonymity, virtual assets service providers that operate peer-to-peer exchange websites, funds deposited or withdrawn from a virtual asset address or wallet with suspected links to darknet marketplaces, questionable gambling sites, and ransomware. I would like to make a pause here to talk about the relationship between virtual assets and gambling sites. We've been seeing practice that a lot of virtual asset service providers, they have authorized the utilization of the virtual assets for illegal gambling and illegal forex activity. This is a very common practice that's being used nowadays, and we should always keep an eye out there in order to identify and constantly monitor their websites and if there are any red flags in this respect. A large number of unrelated virtual assets wallets controlled from the same IP or IMAC address is also a red flag, which indicates the use of share wallets registered to different users to conceal their relationship to each other. Now let's tackle red flags indicators with regards to senders and recipients. These revolve around irregularities observed during either the account creation process or during the CDD process and customer profile. I've got a few examples of these. Transactions that are initiated from IP addresses from sanctioned jurisdictions, creating separate accounts under different names to circumvent restrictions on trading and withdrawal limits, non-willingness to provide complete KYC information or providing fake forged documentation. You see, all these red flags, when identified, in their vast majority, they should constitute a good enough reason for a submission to a suspicious activity report to MOCAS. Now let's tackle the end user's profile. The end user profile, a red flag indicator, can be identified by detecting unusual behavior that can suggest criminal activity, such as usage of non-standard IP address, discrepancies between IP addresses associated with the user's profile and for which transactions are being initiated, or address association with illegal activity. Obviously, the points that you have here, they are more comprehensive, but in the interest of time, I am just mentioning a few of those. Now, the typical red flags with regards to source of funds and source of wealth. These are typical and they're applicable, in traditional banking, but here I would like to call your attention to the following. Transactions originating from destined to online gambling service, which comes back to my previous point of the close relationship between virtual asset service providers allowing the utilization of crypto assets in illegal gambling and forex sites. Transactions that lack transparency or insufficient information on the origin and owners of the funds, or a customer's source of wealth primarily deriving from investments in virtual assets and initial coin offerings, both legitimate and fraudulent. And last but not least, the geographical risks. Criminals can exploit countries with weak or absent national AML CFT measures for virtual assets. That's why Antonia was focusing so much in the importance that one of the biggest requirements is that to ascertain that the merchant is actually incorporated in a jurisdiction that has enacted the FATF recommendations or has transposed into national law the dispositions of the fifth AML directive, and with a clear supervisory and regulatory body. This could be visible when funds originate from or ascend to these jurisdictions with weak AML CFT controls. We can also see as a red flag virtual assets exchange that are located in these jurisdictions, or end users that set up offices, or actually they move offices to these jurisdictions with no clear rationale to do so. Now, we have some jurisdictions that we consider that should not be suitable for this sort of businesses. So we've included that we do not recommend accepting merchants or customers, VASPs, that are located in high-risk third country jurisdictions as per the latest European Commission list. We also do not recommend to accept countries that are included in the European list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes, as well as of the list of the countries where virtual assets are banned in 2020. We have included a couple of real-life cases, but in the interest of time, and I know that you will be able to receive this presentation, and the last slide, it's included the link where you can find these real life case scenarios where we can go through it at your own pace. So thank you for your attention, and I just hand over back to Antonia.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much, and indeed, if you would like to receive the rest of the presentation, you could always ask for it, and we can send it to you. Plus, we're here because we believe that knowledge should be shared for free, and we believe that knowing is an important factor on how to treat and this type of activities. We are for with regards to virtual assets, but we are against in manipulating and misusing the system, because again, compliance is something live. It's something that derives from the needs of society, and it's there because people have manipulated and are manipulating the system. So we've put some recommended reading and some of the University of Nicosia courses here. Some of the recommended reading you can see is directly in the page of FATF. You may search it, and these are the related virtual assets and virtual asset services providers and stable coins and the use cases, and also what I find very important, if you have the time and you're willing to do so, please have a look on the technical assessment, which actually helps you to understand what do regulators want and how they examine it. Moreover, there is the free mock offered by the University of Nicosia with regards to the introduction of digital currencies, which is very helpful because in order to comply, you need to know your product, you need to know your market in order for you to understand what are the risks behind it. If you don't understand your product, if you don't understand your market, how can you assist your firm to comply with it? So with this course, actually, the introduction, they do offer a solid base on understanding throughout the course of weeks what are actually digital currencies and where are they coming from. They didn't just happen in a day. And then you have the Blockchain Regulatory Academy. You can find the link there. And also the Blockchain Regulation and Policy offered by Jeff Batman, who is one of the top professionals in his sector. He's offering a professional certificates course, again, with the University of Nicosia. And also, don't forget about our favorite technology regulatory partner, iSpiral, that do offer solutions for anti-money laundering compliance, monitoring, and also with regards to the virtual assets. And thank you for bearing with us. I know it was a long night. We had so much more to share with you. We wish. I know that you have a lot of questions that we'll be more than happy to answer by either private email or message, because unfortunately we're running out of time. But we are here at the Decentralized Chapter Nicosia, Decentralized Nicosia Chapter. We are here. We're here in order to anticipate your questions, in order to address your questions, and in order to assist in any way we can in the sharing of knowledge with regards to virtual assets and virtual asset services providers, or any other type of virtual assets. Thank you so much and have a great night. Bye.